Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our Seek Safely Roundtable discussion.
Hi, Jean.
Hi. So yeah, I'm Jean Brown. I've got with me Tony Kirby. These are all some of our Seek board members, Dr. Glenn Doyle and Ginny Brown. So this month, we are here to talk about some updates with our consumer protection bill, which is currently in New York State with the New York State legislature. So you may have heard us talk about this before. We've been working on it for a little while.
A
while.
Minute. Just a minute.
Yeah. Maybe a minute and a half.
That's it. Yeah, maybe a minute and 3/4 even. But yeah, that's how it goes. That's how it goes. We are not discouraged. We are persistent, and we're moving on with it. And we had some exciting things happen recently. One of our contacts with our Senate sponsor, Senator Skoufis, reached out to us to get some input. The bill has been for a while with the Senate Consumer Protection Agency. And so they had some questions, they wanted some clarification, and they reached out to us to get some feedback. As a nonprofit organization, we don't lobby for legislation, but we are consulting on this legislation because we're in a position of we're kind of like experts in this area now. Mm-hmm. So we now have the new latest draft, which again is still in the Consumer Protection Committee. And our hope is that they're going to look at it and then push it to the floor to get voted on. So today we really just wanted to talk about some of the updates that were made. It was really interesting. They actually ended up adding a lot of text. So I can show you, I have the bill here. Everything that's highlighted is like new additions to the bill. And of course, I will link. Everybody can go take a look at the text, and I'll provide all those links so people can see. Yep. So yeah, we're just here to discuss what some of those changes were and then talk about the next steps for this effort.
And maybe we can provide some context too. So the reason why the legislation right now is at the Consumer Protection Committee is because like what we're actually proposing like isn't a whole new law, like it's not a whole new category of legislation. What we're really talking about is kind of tweaking already existing law and regulation such that some of this self-help, we're never quite sure what to call people who do self-help, right? Like they're providers of self-help, they're not practitioners really, and frankly, that's also been one of the holdups. Like, what do we call these people? Even like, what do you call someone like Tony Robbins or James Arthur? Whatnot.
Depending on who you talk to, different people are in there.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So the reason why it's in the Consumer Safety Committee is because, one of the things that we've learned is that there are laws that regulate providers of services like personal training, for example, or certain wellness practices like yoga or whatnot. And that's really kind of what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is, again, tweaking what's already on the books such that some of these practices and events can be covered.
Yeah. Exactly. So the main thing that the bill has always kind of covered is that it specifies right off the top that we're dealing with unlicensed professionals.
Unlicensed, exactly.
Exactly. So people who don't already have some licensing under the State of New York Department of Education. So it's kind of in that way trying to capture all of these people who are then providing a certain set of services to their consumers.
Yep. The big reason why that's important is when you look at the fact that, like, take me as an example. I'm a psychologist. I'm a licensed psychologist. Mm-hmm. What a psychology license means is that it's been verified that I have the education and the training and like I've had the experience to do what I say I'm going to do. If we live in a world where, if I just decided, I really want to give people advice, but I don't want to get that education and training.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bother getting the license. I'm just going to be a self-help practitioner, right? that creates an environment in which there's no incentive to actually get the license.
Yeah.
Right? I could just say I'm a self-help guy, and I wouldn't have to bother with regulation and licensing and continuing education, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why that licensing piece is so important.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, so someone who's non-licensed also has no board of ethics overseeing their practice.
Yeah.
So when something goes wrong, they're not answerable to anyone. This bill is making these unlicensed people answerable to New York State if they don't comply with some of the safety requirements that are specified here in the bill.
Right.
So this reiteration certainly goes into a lot more detail than what we had before.
Yeah.
We've always talked about potentially harmful physical and emotional activities and having a risk management plan and professionals on site in order to manage any kind of accident or, helping to mitigate people's risk.
Yeah.
So, this new reiteration just goes into a lot more specificity about what that means.
Right.
And what it looks like.
The big problem is, who does the state put in charge of taking a look at this and whether people are doing things correctly or not? And I think that's one of the big hangups right now is that decision hasn't been made. Is it the Department of State?
We're not really asking the state to enforce this, Tony. We're really asking the state to provide consequence when this doesn't take place.
I agree 100%, but the problem is, who's responsible for providing consequences? I don't know right now. And, a couple of agencies were mentioned, but I don't know if any agency has stepped up and said they'd do it, So I think that's one of the big problems right now.
Well, the bill specifies that the Department of State shall impose civil penalties for any self-practitioner who's in violation of some of these,
I saw that
here, so, but it has to be brought to the Department of State's attention if someone hasn't complied. So putting this out as legislation helps the consumer to know this is what you're entitled to.
Yeah.
And if you're not experiencing this in, going to some kind of self-help practice or practitioner, they're in violation of the law.
Yeah, I know. But the Department of State may want social services to do this and not do it themselves. So the state has to make a decision about how they're going to hold people accountable.
And I think in a way that's something that might kind of come later. With legislation, enforcement is always one of the tricky parts about legislation. You have a law on the books, but how does it get enforced, and who's in charge of enforcing it? It's not really the legislative branch that's ever in charge of enforcing something. It's it comes down to the governor and the government then to enforce it. Right. So I think what I could foresee happening with this legislation is that once it's passed, it might take it getting used a few times before New York State then figures out how they're going to enforce it. Yeah. But at the very least, it's going to be there to, like Ginny said, kind of show consumers and providers that the providers have obligations that they are responsible for. So, I think even if that enforcement piece is still absent, at least we're going to get to that point of showing that there is legal obligation on the part of the providers.
They don't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the changes that we see in this new iteration, one of the things I found interesting is that the essential guts of the bill are the same in terms of what it requires. They've just given it more detail. So they provided definitions. So we have a definition for what a sweat lodge ceremony is. We have a definition for trust exercises, strength exercises, and also coercive control techniques. So these definitions are provided before the bill even gets into the specific obligations of the provider.
Yeah, which they need to do.
Yeah, so I thought that was interesting because I think it's more clearly putting the bill in the context of what we think of as the self-help industry by giving these sort of examples of what they're looking at.
Yep.
And again, it's not limiting the bill to these specific activities. It's just mentioning these as some of the activities that are covered. It's always, including but not limited to is sort of the language in the bill, so that there's still room to cover other things that it doesn't specifically mention.
Talk about a very clear illustration of the problem, one of the problems with the self-help industry, that we're in a position of having to constantly add, like, okay, and also this is included, and also this is included.
Yes.
Specifically because self-help as an industry isn't limited to, like, again, like if we're talking about psychotherapy, we kind of know what that is, right? We kind of know it's a couple people in a room talking to each other, right?
Yep.
If we're talking about personal training, we kind of know what that is. It's people in the gym and whatever. Now, self-help is by its nature kind of so broad that we're in this position of constantly having to, like, oh, and by the way, sweat lodges. Oh, and by the way, strength exercises. And by the way, it's a illustrative problem.
Exactly.
Not defined like psychology is.
Yeah. And the types of activities that people provide, it's always sort of innovating, which is one of the interesting and exciting things about self-help. I think it's one of the things that draws people in, right? You can go, sort of experiment or sort of adventure with like these new techniques that you're not going to find in more traditional fields. And that's one of the things that's attractive to people. But yeah, we have to keep in mind that because of that constant change and innovation, any legislation that we have is going to have to be nimble enough to handle new things that come up. So yeah. So then one of the other changes that comes in the bill is part of one of the obligations that was already in the previous version of the bill was that the self-help practitioner has to provide the client with a copy of the contract in which a disclosure of risk is displayed. And so now it specifies what those risks may include. So it's bodily harm, serious injury, psychological harm, or death in relation to specific activities. And then it lists a number of those possible activities, again, including but not limited to. And now we list sweat lodge ceremonies, sensory deprivation, food deprivation, water deprivation, sleep deprivation, social isolation, exposure to loud noises or music, firewalking, hypnosis, activities using an axe or any weapon defined in an existing section of the penal law, tests of endurance, breath manipulation to limit oxygen levels and induce altered mental states, trust exercises, rope and other obstacle courses, hikes, rappelling, strength exercises, and coercive control techniques. So again, all of that language was not in the original version of the bill, and now they have included it. And I'm just going to pat us on the back here, but that's all some context that we provided to the legislators to include.
Very much. It's like, I think SEEK has done a really important function of educating legislators and their staff about, like, look, you may think, again, when you think of self-help, like, you might think of like a Tony Robbins kind of pep rally. Fact that, again, like, it really goes down the rabbit hole. Like who would have thought that? Yeah, I'm going to go to a self-help thing and throw axes, right? That's all context that we've kind of helped provide, and so I think it's been a real success.
Right, and what this says to the consumer is that you have a right to know what's going to happen at an event that you're paying for before you get there.
Mm-hmm.
So then you can make an informed decision about the types of risks you're willing to take for your own personal or, your own personal health and safety.
And what this bill will also show the consumer is that not only are they entitled to know what risks they're taking, but they're entitled to know that the practitioner is going to provide professionals to mitigate that risk.
Exactly.
When what happened in Sedona happened, we were shocked that they weren't within cell reception to call out for help, that there wasn't an EMT there or a medical tent, or, so many physical events that people go to that are challenging have, some type of medical security for folks who may struggle with the risk they're being willing to take, but we're still providing support for them. When you go to a marathon, you're going to have water tents, you're going to have medical tents. So it's the same principle. And one of the things that we know about trying to get this bill passed, and we talk about enforcement, I agree with Jean. Most important is just to get this out there, and then specific kinds of enforcement, will follow. But if this had been on the books in Arizona, it would have completely changed the complexion of James Ray's trial, because he would have been clearly in violation of the law. People were not clearly warned and prepped with all the things that were going to happen during that week, and there was no risk management plan that was in place.
No
And
professionals available.
No professionals were there.
Exactly.
So, that alone, you have a situation like that, and that's going to change practice. This goes on the books, and people look at it and go, "Ooh, this is what I'm expected to do now."
Right.
It's going to change the practice of people in this industry to make things more ethical and safe for the individuals that are participating in events.
Right. So yeah, that's a whole other section that is another update to this this bill as it's changed recently. So there's a lot more specificity as to what's required for the risk management plan and what that needs to look like, that the self-help provider is obligated to show that it exists before people are actually signing up for or coming to the event.
Exactly.
I think the point that it would have really changed James Arthur Ray's trial, the complexion of the trial is a really well taken one. Like, I'm also reminded of the recent couple of years ago now, trial of Keith Raniere from Nexium, right?
Yeah.
So the state of New York really, in some ways, had to bend over backwards to figure out what to charge him with, because the vast majority of the things that happened in Nexium and DOS were quite legal, right? The state of New York had to kind of bend over backwards, like, well, okay, like if we frame it this way, we can get them on trafficking, right? Like if we frame it this way, we can get them on racketeering, right? But there wasn't a straightforward way to just charge him with, look, you were operating this group from a position of coercive control, and these decisions were not actually free will decisions, right?
Yeah.
So as more legislation, like not just this, but as kind of the trend goes in this direction of acknowledging coercive psychological control and manipulation as something that shouldn't just be a matter of like, y'all know the risks, you can get involved at your own risk. As this becomes acknowledged as a thing that really robs people of autonomy,
right?
Then prosecutors will no longer be in that position of being like, well, okay, I guess we can get them on extortion. I guess we can get them on racketeering. I guess, right? We can just say, no, you violated this.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that I think is really interesting in this new version of the bill, and that, again, we at SEEK encourage them to include this idea of coercive control. And we're also seeing this now with new legislation that's addressing domestic violence situations. The law is finally starting to get a handle on this concept of coercive control. And this is a really important concept for the issue of self-help. And when self-help slides into cult realm, as it did in Nexium, that coercive control piece is huge, because it needs to be in there to say that sometimes people, sure, it looks like they're doing something of their own free will, but the reality is that they have been psychologically manipulated to do things that they would otherwise consider and know to be unsafe for themselves, which was definitely the case in Sedona. So I am very happy to see that language included now, and I think it's really important for what we're trying to capture with this effort.
I agree.
Another big hope of mine, anyway, is that as legislation like this becomes more common, again, we're hoping that New York is kind of the gateway for other states to consider similar legislation. But my hope is that as awareness of this as an issue raises, and as the government kind of endorses that awareness through legislation, figures such as Oprah, for example, may think twice about having someone like James Arthur Ray on her show, right? Because as we know, like, one of the ways that a lot of people kind of get introduced into this entire self-help environment is through figures like Oprah and other media figures. Well, my hope is that, again, as awareness is raised and as these laws go into effect, like that would, at the very least, give some pause when Oprah, for example, is having someone on her show. It's like, well, okay, now there's this entire realm of things to think about that we didn't have to think about before.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are some of the changes that have happened in the bill. Again, I'll post links so you can read it for yourself and see what we're talking about. I'll even put up kind of a comparison, what it looked like before, what it looks like now, so you can see what has changed. So now I just want to move into what are the next steps in this process of getting this passed. So we continue to be in touch with the contacts that we have both in the Senate and in the Assembly to, kind of keep on top of what's happening with the bill and to keep pushing them to push it themselves. And we've heard that for, the people that we've been working with up to this point, it seems to be a real priority for them, that they want to get this through this year. Another nice thing about it is that we have support from both sides of the aisle. I think, they're recognizing this isn't like a political issue. This is just a matter of consumer safety, addressing an issue that is sort of glaringly left out of existing consumer protection right now. So the thing that we really need help with is just getting the word out to legislators in New York State. And that's where all of our supporters come in. It's really important for people to reach out to their senators, their assembly members, and to say, hey, look, this exists. This is really important. Can you please support this bill when it comes up for a vote? And even if it's not reached the floor for a vote yet, I think us putting pressure on them will start them asking, okay, where is this bill? Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah.
So I will, again, put a lot of information out there for people for how you can contact your legislators. If you go on to some of the websites that I'll link to, it's really easy to send them an email. It's like you have the bill right there, and then you just click a thing that says, do you support this bill, yes or no? And when you hit yes, and you've put in your zip code, it brings up like a little email box for you to email your senator. You don't even have to know who your senator or assembly member is. It'll tell you, and then you can contact them right from that page. So it's actually really easy. Calling them is always great as well.
Cool.
And again, we'll help you figure out who your legislators are so that you can easily find out how to reach them.
Yeah.
And we just need to put this pressure on to get this done. So yeah.
And Jean, where will people find those links?
Yeah, so I'll put the links in like the notes for this video here. We have them up already on our website under the legislation tab on our website. You get links to how to find your assembly member, how to find your senator. And yeah, we'll put it out on all our social media, in our newsletter and everything, so we can just kind of I'll put it everywhere I can to try to get it in front of people. Yeah.
Good. Great.
And the last thing I want to say about it is, we're recording this week, this last week in May. And of course, we just had the tragic school shooting in Texas. I don't know about everyone else, but this one has really hit me hard. My daughter is the same age as some of those kids. So
yeah,
I just want to acknowledge it in the sense that, of course, our hearts go out to the people who are struggling with it. I know for me personally, sorry, my first reaction was to feel really angry because sometimes it feels like things like this happen and nothing ever changes, and it gets really frustrating.
yeah,
As I was preparing for this episode here today, I was looking over the text of this bill, and it gave me a lot of hope that things can change. We have identified a problem because of a tragedy that we experienced
yeah,
that felt so unjust and terrible. And looking at this bill, I can see that our effort matters and that we can make things better.
yeah,
And it's hard. It's taken us years to do this, but we are so close. So we are asking everybody for help, trying to get this through. And let's just, we can't fix every problem. This obviously doesn't do anything to solve, what happened in Texas and what happens in our schools. But this is something that we can fix right now. So
yeah,
let's do it.
Jean, I just want to say it's not completely unrelated either, because people go to self-help sometimes rather than going to licensed professionals, or
Yeah.
sometimes they've had a bad experience.
Yeah.
And you still want to make sure where people are going to get help, it's good help.
Mhm.
And it's not detrimental help, because when people go through a self-help event and have a bad experience, it doesn't help their mental health. It
Right.
doesn't help them to be less angry. It doesn't help them to be a better citizen of the planet, So when we look at what's behind this terrible violence that happens in our country, we're also looking at people not getting the help they need.
Yeah.
The right kind of help that they need to grow in their own life, to be
Yeah.
the best person they can be.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, thank you. I don't want to get, political with things, but you're right. It is, of course, related when we're talking about, mental health issues, as well as Dr. Doyle has pointed out so many times. For so many people who can't access more traditional mental health services, self-help is their mental health help.
Yeah.
And yeah, absolutely. We want to make it better for people. We want to make it safer. We want to weed out the crap that is abusive for people. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah, they need to have standards.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And thank you, Tony, for all the work you've done for the last 6 years in being so persistent to keep the legislators aware that this is part of our mission, to make sure that we're trying to make things safer for consumers.
Well, I was talking earlier about reaching out to Stephanie Jordan, who actually, once I got online and checked her out, she's like 1.5 miles away from my home, where her home office is. It's in East Greenbush. And so I think I'll be setting up a meeting with her and asking her to also work with some of her, people she does business with, and have it be an approach where it's not just working with one legislator. She's being our mouthpiece in many ways too.
Yeah.
I think that'll
And
be important.
I think that's a good example of, a lot of times we think that our legislators are just sort of sitting in, in the government offices, and they're very detached from us. But usually they're actually pretty easy to reach.
Yeah.
They don't hear from constituents a whole lot. So if you reach out to them, it does have an impact. And just getting the name of this bill, the subject matter of this bill in front of your local representatives can actually make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think the personal contact makes a big difference too.
It does. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
No problem.
Like I said, I'll be putting lots of links and information in the show notes and everywhere I can get it so that we can get everybody on board to help us get this out there.
And thank you for your continued good work.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks.
I appreciate
All right.
it.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, have a good one.